Without further ado, we are going to get right into the seminar, and we'll try to keep it to no more than 45 minutes. And so if you need to get going on something, you won't feel like you're missing anything important. But I wanted to ask everybody to help me welcome our speaker, Anil Singh-Molares. And well, whatever you want to do, and I'm here with 3 other guys, and we're going to clap our hands. Well, Anil, after having been here for the 4 days now, you're not a stranger to this campus and also to the Gainey School of Business. And I've been in some of the sessions with you, and I have shared lunch, dinner, and I feel like I know you a lot now, and I have a lot of admiration of who you are, what you represent, and the career path, that kind of thing. And I'm going to just quickly to talk a little bit about you, and as an intro, and in case what our participants may not have picked it up. Well, sitting next to me is a gentleman who had worked 12 years at Microsoft, and has been very successful, and started out managing the team of translators and terminologists, and quickly he advanced into a position to manage all the international vendors, and that is a big jump in career path in terms of career development, and we're going to learn a little bit from Anil on that. But at the peak of his career, Anil decided to leave this a software giant, and subsequently he started several businesses, and some are very successful to the point where he said, well, it's time for me to move on to something else, and he sold a couple of those businesses. But not every business that he started were successful, and but each time when he looked back, he learned something important, that he was able to continue to move on. Another part of Anil is he co-founded a non-profit organization, and we're going to learn from him on that, and what prompted him to do that. So maybe the first thing that I wanted to ask Anil is on his cross-cultural upbringing. And as I understand that you were born in Holland, grew up in Belgium, and came here to the States 40 years ago.
Yep.
So you speak Spanish, French, and English fluently. You also speak some of the German, a little bit of Japanese. He's very humble, and I'm sure he speaks more than just a little bit on that language, and his world travels, and as you can imagine, because of his role at Microsoft. And tell us a little bit about that part. How important is your cross-cultural upbringing in shaping who you are and what you do?
Sure. So thank you for that introduction, and hello to all of you. So yes, my cross-cultural upbringing was a key to who I've become. In addition to being born in Holland, my mother is from Spain, my father is from India. We did live in a number of countries, including India and England before Belgium. So I grew up with different languages, different cultures. I grew up in a culture in Belgium that was also highly segregated between Flemish speakers and Dutch speakers and French speakers in Belgium. So my experiences even before coming to the United States already had taught me to be very cross-culturally aware and able to navigate across cultural borders with some ease. When I came to the United States, that became even more pronounced because I went from a fairly homogeneous culture to a very, very diverse culture. So I was very fortunate to have parents that fostered that kind of international upbringing.
Sure.
have found those skills, the language skills, the cross-cultural skills, one of the most important in my career. Directly led to, I would argue, my successes at Microsoft and my successes after Microsoft. I love to travel. I love lots of different cultures. I love lots of different approaches. I'm always fascinated with the differences between cultures, and I'm always looking to bridge gaps.
Okay. Well, that's great, Anil. I also understand that besides your cross-cultural upbringing, you were also very intentional when you were in college. Your first love was in the literature.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about it?
Sure. So I went to college, and I actually have two majors, both that are passions of mine to this day. One is philosophy, and the other one was English literature. Philosophy was a fantastic learning ground. I always say the study of philosophy is not the study of all texts. It's a study of a way of life. I drew a lot from the ancient Greek philosophers. I drew a lot from Plato in particular and from Socrates, to be very specific. I think that the Socratic method is an invaluable skill that you can use in the world of business. It's an invaluable skill that you can use in any facet of life. So those experiences with the liberal arts really have shaped my direction professionally, and they are, as I said, not dry disciplines, but very, very active parts of who I am.
You mentioned that you have two majors.
Yeah.
What's the other one?
Well, one was philosophy, and one was English literature.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And was English literature your first choice?
They were both.
Philosophy?
No, actually, both. I had a great passion for both disciplines, and ended up taking a number of courses in both areas simultaneously. So that by my sophomore, junior year, I think I already fulfilled most of the requirements for both of those degrees. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And then what do you do upon the graduation at the young age? Yeah.
Yeah. So with those degrees, I had been an intern at a press agency, and so I became a journalist for 2 or 3 years after I graduated, and I enjoyed that, but I really thought that I didn't have the necessary temperament to be a journalist. You have to be someone who likes to ask a lot of questions that people don't want to answer, and that's not for everybody. So my other passion was religion, theology. So I ended up going to grad school and getting a comparative religions degree and focusing really on theology.
Where did you go to get your master's?
Harvard Divinity School.
Harvard, okay.
And
why Harvard?
It's a good school.
Okay.
And
I think no one would argue with you on that.
No, it was a great intellectual environment, a lot of great teachers, professors, a lot of access to great resources, a lot of very intelligent dialogue, very stimulating. So it was a really wonderful experience to grow in that and learn in that environment. So those three disciplines, theology, philosophy, and literature, really are my grounding for what came next.
Sure. Well, that's very interesting background, especially that knowing you did not stick with, say, that career path. And was it 1992 or 91?
1991.
1991 that you started working at Microsoft.
Yep.
And if I go to my undergraduate classes and ask people who wants to work for Microsoft, and I think everybody's hand would be up in the air. And can you tell us how it happened? And looking back, was it a coincidence, or maybe your background, your education, pretty much have helped shape you and create that environment for you to take on a challenge at Microsoft?
Sure. So I had been a translator through most of the 80s. So by the time I left Harvard, I actually went to work for a company called the Boston Language Institute in Boston, Massachusetts, that had commissioned a number of translations for me. I translated a number of books. And so then I was leading their translation and interpretation department. And this was when software localization was just coming into being. And so I did that for a couple of years. And my wife at the time wanted to move back to the West Coast. And so we faxed my resume into Microsoft in 1990. It did take them about 9 months to get back to me. But once they did, within 2 or 3 weeks, I had done the interviews, and they had actually relocated me to Redmond, Washington, to manage a team of translators, German and French translators, language leads, terminologists, that were doing the first simultaneous shipment in Microsoft history, a product called Microsoft Works. And from there, I developed a career at Microsoft, basically managing international vendors, doing it in a different way than had been done before, which is to do it through outside agencies and outside vendors rather than doing it internally at Microsoft. And so I managed to convince the top executives at Microsoft that I was the right person to do that. And they gave me their backing and their blessing. And so over the next 12 years, I basically managed the selection, the growth, the contracting, the business management of all of Microsoft's international localization vendors across all of the product groups.
Sure. Wow. Is another thing that you work with for a very successful company, to say the least, and you work alongside the great people who are entrepreneurial. And Bill Gates for sure, it's one of them. And I know that you're not one of Bill Gates' direct reports.
Nope.
But you had several opportunities to the meeting with him one-on-one. It's like this. Tell us about that experience and what did you learn from Bill Gates?
Yeah, so you're right. I don't, I had some exposure to Bill Gates, but it was very critical for me and very critical for my career. I went up before him through my boss and had some very arduous sessions trying to convince him that we could do international operations in a different way, in a more cost-effective way, while still maintaining the quality and increasing our time to market. And so those were very grueling sessions, but very profitable. He's a very, very, very bright individual who has an uncanny ability to see right through any argument and to find a weakness if there is one. And so I learned a lot from that experience. And then with his support and my boss's support, I basically got a mandate to kind of reinvent the way we did international operations at Microsoft in the early 90s. A fantastic opportunity and fantastic learning opportunity in particular.
And of course, with that role, you continued to travel. You continue to use your cross culture of the upbringing, the liberal arts skills, and can you bring us back? Say it has been 10 years now since you left for the Microsoft,
right?
And was there a day in your life during the 12 years working at Microsoft you wonder, wow, what am I getting myself into?
Yeah.
There are many different ways to make a living, but Microsoft, why? And also have a participant raising the question that, well, how does English literature, which is your major in the college, inform your perspective in business, or does it?
Yeah, it does actually, and so I'd say from philosophy I got the ability to distinguish good arguments from bad ones, sound ones from unsound ones, and good judgment is a skill that is very valuable in business. It's very valuable across many different endeavors, but it's particularly valuable in business. English literature gave me a few skills. One is the ability to communicate clearly and efficiently, make good presentations, make good arguments, do it in a way that's succinct, that gets to the point very quickly, which is very highly valued at Microsoft, cutting to the chase. Mm-hmm. But also, literature is the analysis of characters, and it's the analysis of the interaction of characters one with the other, with their circumstances, with their environment. So literature is a lot about psychology and psychological understanding. And so those skills are invaluable also when you're a manager, a professional manager, is how to read people, how to read their intentions, how to read their motivations, how to figure out how they work well together, how to distinguish between cultural differences and bridge them. So I would say literature and philosophy were both directly relevant to my success as a manager and my understanding of people and my understanding of circumstances and situations in particular.
So in a way that you didn't have any regret for going to Microsoft, because while you were able to use your talents, your skills, your knowledge to the in the business world.
That's right.
Was it difficult to work in the very competitive environment? You know, there was everybody works at Microsoft. Microsoft has to be very sharp. Because the environment is such you cannot afford not being sharp.
Yeah, it was, you know, I mean, Microsoft has evolved considerably in the 22 years since I joined the company, but it was always distinguished by incredibly intelligent people with very high IQs. Back in the 90s, we were all much younger, much more aggressive, much more competitive. There was a real dynamic in Microsoft to change the world. It was a very ambitious company, and I shared that ambition. I shared those ambitions, and you know, the downside of that is that there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of tension sometimes, creative tension at its best, but sometimes not as creative, sometimes a little bit on the destructive side as well. And so there were days when I could see myself waning. I could see the people around me getting tired not just physically, but intellectually and emotionally as well. So the upside was this incredible drive, this incredible determination to succeed, and the downside on occasion was you know, tiredness and exhaustion, and so I saw a lot of that as well, both personally and with the people who I worked with. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Anil, for sharing with us on that. Well, we titled our webinar today as developing and exercising entrepreneurial leadership for career success. And if you agree with me about Microsoft is an environment that fosters entrepreneurial leadership.
Yes.
Do you feel like that you learned to be an entrepreneurial leader while you were at Microsoft, or might be that you have this natural ability to lead entrepreneurially? Right. And when you see an opportunity, you know about this would lead to success, and that requires taking risks, taking responsibilities, and Microsoft everybody is critical to the organization's success. Right. Although not everybody can claim that they are the most important person. Right. I think there's only one or two persons Microsoft who could make the claim, but equally everybody is critical to success.
Yeah.
Can you comment on that?
Sure. So yes, I did learn a lot about entrepreneurship at Microsoft, especially the time period that I was there, especially in the early 90s, when the company still was relatively young. You know, there were 7,000, 8,000 employees when I first joined Microsoft, and it was a culture that very much encouraged entrepreneurship and rewarded entrepreneurship, creative thinking outside the box, coming up with new solutions, starting new businesses, knowing how to analyze market opportunities, learning how to analyze P&L statements, doing return on investment analyses. So I, and particularly my role as Director of Vendor Relations, I was managing a fleet of entrepreneurial companies, and so I gained a lot of experience by working with them. Some of them were very, very small companies that then turned into medium-sized companies, and today are rather large-sized companies. So I did learn a lot about entrepreneurship at Microsoft, especially at that time. But I have to say that after leaving Microsoft in 2003 and taking a little time off, and then starting to start up my own various companies, some of which, you're quite right, succeeded, some failed, and some I sold. It's a very different dynamic. Because when you are at a corporation like Microsoft, you do have a level of support. You know, you have an accounting department, you have a finance department, you've got lawyers, you have product development specialists, you have developers, you have a whole infrastructure that supports you whether you realize it or not. And when you go off and become an entrepreneur on your own, there is no support structure other than the one that you build around yourself. So my first assumption, which was, I learned all of this entrepreneurial discipline at Microsoft, now it's going to be easy to do it outside. That assumption was not correct. Doing it on your own is much harder. The great side is the upside of that is that you are a master of your own destiny. You make decisions on your own. You live with them. You don't have to live with someone else's politics. They're your own politics, and people have to live with them. But there is no support structure. If you fall flat on your face, there's nobody there to pick you up. If you make a mistake, your business can crash and burn. And so the stakes are much higher as an entrepreneur, as a pure entrepreneur in the real world.
Sure. Yeah. It's one thing to think about I want to be my own boss. It's another when you somewhat lonesome and no one's there to pick you up, like you said about that. Can we go back to a couple of those businesses that you didn't do well?
Sure.
What did you learn from those failures? And I don't think about the failures is a proper word to use, because
learning opportunities.
Learning opportunities, and you apply what you learn and you move on. And it's easy to say, I've tried it and it's not for me, and I'm going to do something else. But you at first have not given up.
Right. So there's a few things I learned. One is that group dynamics are critical, and picking the right partners is not as easy as it looks, because sometimes on paper it looks like you should be a great match with someone else, and that this team of 5 or 6 people that you've assembled is a powerhouse, and they're all going to work very well together, and there's going to be a seamless integration, and everyone's going to agree on the culture and the way forward. And unfortunately, that's not always true, even with people who are very bright in their own right, who are very accomplished in their own right. But sometimes if you bring them together in the wrong combination, they start to work against each other more than working together. Sure. And so a couple of the businesses that I actually thought were incredibly promising ideas and where we had very strong teams, unfortunately dissolved into some squabbling and some tension and some power struggles. And so those are great learning opportunities, because
if you can afford
to make those learnings, yes,
to make those mistakes.
And thank God we could do that. But I would say picking the right partner in business, picking the right partner in life is the same thing. Is probably the single most difficult thing about building a company from scratch or being an entrepreneur, is making sure you surround yourself with people who have complementary skills to you, complementary strengths. And you do want some tension, because that creates tension is good, but you also want to make sure that people are aligned. And so that's a lesson that I'm still learning, and that I certainly learned the hard way.
Sure. Anil, let's change gear a little bit then. Okay. Maybe we can shift from the running for-profit organizations to the running non-profit. And we understand that you have co-founded a non-profit organization. Can you tell us a little bit about that, and what prompted you to do that, and what are your hopes of founding this non-profit organization?
Sure. So I founded 2 nonprofits. The first one is named the Pre-Eclampsia Foundation, For those of you who don't know, preeclampsia is pregnancy-induced hypertension. It's a disorder that affects first-time moms disproportionately, but not exclusively. It's a condition that can be fatal if it's not properly treated. It leads to very pronounced blood pressure variations that can lead to strokes and heart attacks and the death of the baby, the death of the mom. And so my wife had experienced preeclampsia with several of our children, and with one of them in particular, it could have been a fatal incident. And so we started looking for an organization focused on preeclampsia that we could contribute to, that we could participate in, and surprisingly, we didn't find any. And so it was at that stage, we're talking 1999, that we decided to start the Preeclampsia Foundation. We actually were one of the first recipients of a grant from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in the year 2000. We built a great medical board. We had a doctor, one of the world's leading authorities on preeclampsia at the University of Washington.
Sure.
So we built a medical board around him. We got these funds from Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And our goal was simply to save one life. And I'm glad to say I'm no longer directly involved with the foundation now, 14 years later. But we did go to the 10th anniversary reunion a few years ago. The organization is thriving. It's gotten all sorts of sponsorships. It's sponsored all sorts of medical research. And we know from the community boards that we built up back in the late 90s and early 2000s that many women have had better outcomes with their children and better outcomes for themselves as a result of the information that we provided and as a result of the networking that foundation provided.
Okay. Well, that's great for that. I wanted to mention one thing that for the not everybody that were at the first webinar, and as a participant, you have the capability of sending in questions that you want me to pass on to our speaker, and you just need to go to the chat box, just type in a question, and I would either fill the questions or to combine them and give, say, the 2 or 3 questions that seem to be go in the same direction. So if you would like to do that, feel free to send in your questions. And in the meantime, I'm going to ask let's see, a very different question. Anil, you are still very young. I think you and I are about the same age, and you're probably younger. But you have 6 children. I only have 2. Looking forward, what kind of impact or legacy you want to leave to society? You have gone through a lot and very successful with Microsoft, and you have done a lot of entrepreneurial activities, starting new businesses, founding or co-founding nonprofit organizations. Looking forward, say, in the next 20, 30 years, what do you think your energy would be the focus on?
Sure. So there's a couple of focuses. You mentioned that I have 6 children, and so certainly probably my most important legacy is them. My impact and my interaction with my kids and with my family in general is very important to me. I think probably most people would agree that that's the top priority.
Yeah.
But I did found a second nonprofit a few years ago called the Compassionate Action Network. And so that's, again, an outgrowth of my liberal arts education and my continuing interest in religions and comparative religions, but not as dry academic exercises, but more as values in action. So we call it Compassionate Action Network. And so I really would like to make some small impact in terms of how we relate to each other, creating structures, creating nonprofits that really foster more human understanding, more tolerance, more diplomacy, less confrontation. So anything that I can do to move the needle towards a compassionate world, towards a world where we all look at the values that we share in common and we build on those, rather than our differences and how those separate us, is something that I'm very much looking forward to. I'm excited by the future. I actually think that I'm at a stage in my life where, with all of the learnings that I've acquired and all of the experiences that I've had, I can be in a position to do even better in the future in terms of those goals.
Well, that reminds me a little bit of your sharing that was it 1988 that you were instrumental in bringing some wall signatories in one place. I think it was Seattle. Among them, there were the Mother Teresa. I think the Al Gore was there, and was the Desmond Tutu, among other people. Dalai Lama.
Carl Sagan. So this is actually at Oxford University at Christ Church College in Oxford in 1988, and it was I was working for an outfit called the Global Forum of Spiritual and Parliamentary Leaders, and so I was the assistant to the executive director, and helped organize the conference, helped bring all those people together, and it was a rather large gathering. I mean, several hundred spiritual leaders and several hundred parliamentary leaders, politicians from around the world, brought together for a week, all staying in the dorms at Oxford, which was quite an experience, and having intensive dialogue on ways that these spiritual leaders and these politicians, these parliamentary leaders, could work together to improve various things. And later, a few years later, they had a conference on the environment, focused on the environment. But it was really about how to integrate values and the goals of politicians in a harmonious way. That's an interest that's continued. And even though I did a detour to Microsoft for a dozen years, I renewed my interest in that area in 2008 when the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Desmond Tutu and some of the world's top neuroscientists came to Seattle for a conference we called Seas of Compassion, of which I was one of the organizers. And that led to the second nonprofit that I founded, the Compassionate Action Network, which is still, even though I'm no longer affiliated directly with it today, which is working on creating cultures of compassion worldwide, has an International Compassionate Cities campaign, and is really doing some very strong efforts to try to make the world a more compassionate place from a very practical standpoint. So I have very much an ongoing interest there, and I hope to foster that interest more in the future.
Anil, I have not met Mother Teresa. I don't think too many people have met her personally. But everybody would agree about that she represents the compassion, just like Christ who is a great model for the compassion. Can you give us maybe a quick synopsis of, say, your personal interaction with the Mother Teresa?
Well, I was one of the event organizers, but I will always remember being struck by how this short little woman, short physically, but really kind of enormous in terms of her impact and her stature, by that. It's not a paradox, but by that juxtaposition of her small physical size, but her tremendous energy and her tremendous enthusiasm. And, we had to put a couple of boxes that she could stand on so she could be high up enough on the podium so that everyone could see her. But, I found her efforts very moving and very admirable. In the same way that I have to say, it wasn't just her. I mean, the Dalai Lama was there, and Archbishop Desmond Tutu was there, many other spiritual leaders. We had Joseph Lowry there also. And just how humble these people all were in person. And how...
And there's one thing that brought them together was their compassion.
Their compassion, exactly, but they were also bound by their humility and by the commonality of their purpose, which was really to make the world a better place for everyone, irrespective of whichever spiritual tradition they were coming from. It was really admirable to see them coming together and saying, we can work together much more effectively than we can work alone.
Sure.
So let's figure out ways to do that.
Okay. Well, we are receiving a couple of questions from the participants. The first one is what part of the world is primed for entrepreneurial opportunities?
I guess I would answer with another question, which what part of the world isn't primed for entrepreneurial?
Wow. You're very intelligent.
No,
put the question back on the audience, I guess.
Yeah. No, but really, no, I mean, I think we're going through a period of fantastic growth, technological innovation. I think there's a lot of things that our world needs. We need better energy strategies across the globe. I think the United States will continue to be a leader in those efforts, but my European friends, my Asian friends, my African friends are all working very hard. Countries like India and China are starting to innovate very, very significantly. In Latin America, in Brazil. So really, I do mean it when I say what part of the world isn't primed for entrepreneurship.
Okay. We just need to be keeping our eyes open.
Absolutely.
For different opportunities. And another question, I think it is a very, very good question, just like the one that was asked earlier. And both are raised by our faculty. And this question is do you think you have done more to improve people's quality of life through changes brought about by Microsoft and its products or through your nonprofit work?
You know, it's hard for me to measure the impact of Microsoft in terms of improving people's lives, other than to say, obviously, created a revolution in terms of technology and in terms of the access that we all have now to things that we take for granted that 20 years ago we're now taking for granted, which is, we have these tremendously powerful tools, these tremendously powerful computers, that can do all sorts of things to make us more productive and more efficient at our jobs. Having said that, the work that I've done with the nonprofits is more immediately, I can see it more immediately, its impact more immediately in my life anyway, and so I'm very happy with some of those outcomes, although I still have a lot to learn and I still hopefully have a lot to offer and a lot of growth to occur. But I would say probably the impact, when I see the impact on an individual or a group of individuals, and I know that I had a little bit to do with that, that makes me proud.
Great. Well, I'm looking at the clock on my computer. It's 12:43, and we're going to wrap up our time in a few minutes, and that's there are more questions coming in. And again, I wanted to take us back to the title of our webinar today, as well, to develop and exercise entrepreneurial leadership. Can you give us some final remarks on how best to develop? If you cannot develop first, you cannot exercise it. Unless you believe you're either born with those skills or you don't have it. And in my mind, we can learn to be entrepreneurial. We can take on leadership. We can take risks, responsibilities. But where do we start? Especially with our audience, mostly MBA students, graduates, and people who are interested and eager to engage in the business world. And as part of our concept for the university, we are to be critical participants of the contemporary world. And I think you fit in that part of the concept. Your involvement in the world, you're making a difference. At least you want to see that happen, whether it's measurable or not.
Yeah. So I would say a couple of things. One of the things that I very often say when I visit universities like yours is that fear is a very good indicator of what you need to do. All of us have fears. And some of us have deep-seated fears about certain things. And whether it's stage fright in my case, and overcoming stage fright to become a public speaker. Leadership also is another one. Leadership can be very lonely, a very lonely place to be. You can find yourself the target of all sorts of attacks, the target of all sorts of criticisms, and very often think yourself without support or without adequate support. And so that becomes then another fear. So I always say that you run towards your fear, not away from it. And you run towards your fears because they're the ones that are telling you what you need to do.
Wow.
And so if you have a particular fear of something, you need to overcome that fear. And if you master your fears, then you're in a position to be a leader. And then also recognizing that leadership doesn't need to be a lonely enterprise, that you can ask people for help. This is something that I'm still working on myself, that you can find support, that there are people who really want to help you, who really want to support you. And so I'd say those two things. One is run towards your fears, and the other one, when you're a leader, don't be afraid to ask for help.
Okay. Can I ask a follow-up question?
Sure, of course.
Well, I know that you will say yes.
Okay.
And I have the microphone, so to speak. So that in terms of exercising, it's almost like practicing. About that. Now, I need to develop some skills, but in terms of practicing, what are some of the platforms that are best for practicing without losing everything, so to speak, and that you have to have calculated risks? And what would be your advice for us? I'm
going to ask you to tell me a little more about that. What,
well, if I take your advice, instead of running away from my fear, I go toward my fear, and once I've mastered that, how do I keep practicing my newfound skill? Right.
So the number one skill that I think you acquire when you run towards your fears instead of running away from them is how to master your fears. And that's a skill that you can impart to anybody else, right? And most people allow themselves to be limited by their fears, limited by their expectations of themselves, which instead of motivating them to do more, motivate them to do less. So what I found in terms of fear is that if you learn how to master it, you can teach somebody else how to master theirs. And say, it's not going to be as bad as you think it is. What's the worst scenario that could happen? What's the worst thing that could happen to you? Oh, you could fail, quote unquote fail. And failure, as we said before, is the best learning, right? So failure is a learning opportunity. And so if you look at it that way, fear and failure are really the greatest teachers that you could possibly have. And if you learn to master your fear and to learn from your failures, you can teach other people to do the same thing. You can mentor them to do the same thing with their own fears. And then hopefully there's a ripple effect. And suddenly you've created a community that is more empowered, that is more self-confident, that is more bold in accomplishing its goals.
That's very good advice, Anil. I have one final question regarding creativity and innovation. And, are you a creative person?
I'd like to think so, yeah.
Okay. And what role has creativity and innovation played in your accomplishments?
I think a very, very big role. I think, and that's where my liberal arts education really has come into play, is if you can see things from lots of different perspectives, you come up with creative solutions kind of by default. So if you can combine unusual degrees together, or you take your learning and you decide you're going to transplant yourself into a completely new industry, that's going to foster creativity, because you're going to have to think very creatively about how do I apply those skills that are very specific to IT to nonprofit. Well, that's very easy. You learn how to run a business, if you look at a nonprofit as a business and the fact that 9 out of 10 fail in the first year because the people running them, although they're good-hearted people, don't have financial expertise, that's one easily transferable skill. When I look at philosophy and the world of business, the Socratic method in particular has helped me be a good business person. So you start thinking about all of the unusual connections between disciplines and groups and industries, and the more points of reference you have, the more creative ammunition you have to tackle those issues.
That's great. Well, we're running out of time, Anil. In the audience, there's one gentleman by the name of Ron Griffith. I will be remiss if I don't acknowledge him. And Ron is the reason why we have Anil in our midst today. Anil came to us as a Woodrow Wilson Business Fellow as part of the Council of Independent Colleges. And every year, the fellows will travel twice to different places. Anil just came back from visiting another independent college or private college, and we are very fortunate to be able to host Anil. And it also came about because of a grant that was written, and we were approved of the grant. It's called the Bondman Grant, and so we want to thank the Bondman Foundation for making this happen. And well, without taking too much more of our speaker's time and your time, I'm going to stop here, and we'll send out the link to the recording in about a week. And we have not nailed the date yet for the November webinar, but the speaker is going to be the Coach Sam Riggleman, our very own Sam Riggleman. Is our baseball coach at the university, and he is a leader, and he is a very warm person, and I really look forward to having him to be our speaker for the next webinar. Well, we'll see all of you, and we will continue with this series until no one registers. Then we know, maybe it's time to move on to something else. So long.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.